We all make mistakes, but sometimes we make more mistakes than we should, and sometimes we make mistakes when we shouldn't, and sometimes we make mistakes that are just unforgivable. Hello and welcome to today's episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy, and we're going to be looking at 7 common player failures when it comes to creating backstories. What does this have to do with being a great GM? Well, as a GM, you have to guide your players. You have to give them ground rules in which to operate. It's very important that you do this. As a result, the burden of educating your players falls to you. That's just what it is. Accept it and move on. So how do we do this? How do we educate our players in terms of backstory anyway? Well, backstory is something that a lot of GMs fail to utilize, and if you're one of them, shame. So, how do we look at backstories? Well, it's how you handle backstories that's most important. If you don't include backstories, then you shouldn't watch this video. Just move on and go sit in the corner over there with average GMs, okay? Backstory is where the players are telling you about their character. They are showing you their character's thoughts and ambitions and drives and motivations. They are also showing you, hey, I see that you've built a world for us to play in. Here's my contribution to that world. It's important that you read the backstories of your characters. So if you don't do that, then that's something that you should start doing from now. But what do you then look for? How do you educate your players to make those backstories work for you and for them? First one up. It is immutable. This backstory is all that was written and is all that can be and all that shall be, so be it. No backstory is immutable. No backstory is complete. And don't challenge your players to give you a complete backstory, because you'll get a 6-volume backstory on your character, which by all rights should put them at level 25 and in charge of several kingdoms. No backstory is immutable. No backstory cannot not be changed. Everything is subject to your approval as the GM. But at the same time, even once you've gone, yeah, I like this backstory, halfway through the game, you are reading the backstory and you're like, you know what, there's that moment where the aunt says something to the character that's very important. I'm going to have that aunt now be in trouble, and the player's going to try and rescue that aunt. And I'm going to have that aunt have a large castle that she owns, because it kind of fits here and there and there. The player might interject and say, oh, but actually my aunt lived in a cottage. And you go, what? Yes, you see on page 42 here, it says that my aunt lives in a cottage. Yes. It says that your aunt lives in a cottage. That was at that time. It's now 5 years later, and she married a duke who lives in a castle. So, the backstory is not immutable. It can always be adjusted and changed. And importantly, as the GM, you are allowed to give feedback that may or may not alter that backstory. So, how do you educate your player about an immutable backstory? You let them know. You simply say, hey guys, give me backstories for your characters, but we're going to discuss them and we might make changes. So just let them know that that's going to happen. Okay. Number 2. You don't need one. Okay, princess, you don't need a backstory. Great. Your character is completely devoid of personality. Your character is useless. If a player doesn't want to create a backstory for their character, that's fine. Don't include their character in terms of a story adventure later on. Again, we spoke about trying to have a balance between plot adventures, character adventures, and then emergent adventures. You try and have that balance going on in your game. That player's character will just not have one. And what do you say to the player to prepare them for this? Guys, I will be using your backstories in this campaign. It is something that I will be doing. If you don't give me a backstory, I won't have anything for you. And that is the consequence you will have to face. Some players will actually like that. They don't like being the center of attention. They don't like having an adventure dedicated just to them. So bear that in mind. They might actually elect to do that voluntarily. That's fine. We can't force people to write backstories. That's not a rule. It's just general courtesy and common sense, I think. You could say that. Can it develop over time, says a player. I want my backstory to develop over time. So at the moment, I've just got I was born, and the rest I'm going to fill in as I go along. You know, that's great, but no, I'm not going to let you do that because I know what you're going to do. Oh, we really need someone who speaks Ancient Elvish. Oh, well, my character's backstory, which I'm writing right now, is that I went and studied Ancient Elvish at the library as a hobby. No, that's not going to happen. That's not fair, because now suddenly the script is no longer Ancient Elvish. Now it's Ancient Dwarvish. Ah, but you see, I've also studied Ancient... Nope, you didn't. No, you didn't. Ah, but it's in my backstory now. Yeah, so you can develop your backstory over time. Yes, absolutely fine. No problem with that. But you have to have a starting backstory already. That's just the rule. You have to tell me where you were born. You have to tell me how you grew up, what kind of circumstances you grew up in. You need to tell me what kind of education you had, and then you need to tell me what you were doing before you became an adventurer. That is stuff that I need to know, and that is not something that can be developed later. You need to develop it now. Just pull up your pants and do it properly. Okay, thank you. Moving on. Right, so that's what you need to do. You need to shepherd and guide them to do that. A character backstory that is more than one page is useless. It really is, unless you are the type of GM who loves reading books. It is useless. You are never going to use that information. Not all of that information. Never in a million years are you going to use all of that information. I could give you my personal biography of my life as a 40-year-old adult male. It would be either one pager, or it could be 1,000 pages, or it could be 1,000 books. You will only get information of value from one pager, or maybe, if you're really interested, from 300 pages. No more than that. There's a reason why we limit the number of pages that biographies can contain. It's because there's just too much information that is absolutely useless and has no value. So if your player says, here's my character backstory, volume 1. You go, thank you, but now I need a one-pager, and that one-pager is going to tell you certain information. And this is information that I need to have. Where were you born? How did you grow up? What education did you have? What were you doing before you became an adventurer, and why did you become an adventurer? Answer those 5 and I will let you go. In a single page. Not one page each, a page for all 5. I know it's going to be tricky, but you can do it. And I need some names in there. Just give me basic names. Your best friend, your mother, your father, your wife, your sister, your brother, your guardians, your parents, whatever that you want to call them. That's what I need. Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye. All right, so you need to prep your players to say you can write whatever backstory you like. It is subject to change, and I need a one-pager. That's what I need. I need a summary. Give me the elevator pitch. Okay, so there you are. Another mistake that players make. The NPCs and their backstory are theirs, and they get to control and determine exactly how and what they do. Yes, whilst they're writing their backstory. Once they have handed that backstory over to you as the GM, those NPCs belong to you. Those NPCs do not belong to anybody else because they're yours. The GM is responsible for NPCs only. The player character, singular, is what the player is responsible for. The player character, singular, is not responsible for the player character NPCs. There's no such thing. So, yeah, the NPCs belong to the GM. So, if the player writes that he had a wonderful upbringing with his father and his mother, and then the GM decides that the mother, although she's going to be kind and caring towards her son, is snarky and sarcastic towards anyone else, that's the GM's prerogative, and the player cannot say, excuse me, if you reference page 52 in chapter 12, you'll see that I said that my mother's a very kind and caring person. I didn't read that far, thank you, Norman. It was not in your one-page brief, and I'm in charge of NPCs. Deal with it, sit down, shut up, and listen to your mother. Prep your players that the NPCs that they create in their backstory do not belong to them, they belong to you. It's very important. They must understand this. And then finally, one of the big mistakes that players make is that the GM is not allowed to add extra events to their backstory. Ha ha ha! Wrong. You as the GM are allowed to go to the character's backstory before the game starts, during the game as well, and say, okay, so this bridge incident where you went fishing and you did this and you did this and you did that. I want you to also know that you caught a golden fish that afternoon, which when you took home, your father confiscated from you because he thought you'd stolen it from the jewelry shop. How that resolved is up to you. You can still have animosity towards your father, or perhaps your father eventually agreed that yes, the golden fish was actually something that you did catch in the river. He apologizes and everything moves on. You are embellishing, you are adding to, you are developing that NPC, that character's background. I would advise that you ask the character, what would you have done if you'd caught a golden fish on that bridge that afternoon and your father had said that you'd stolen it from the local goldsmith? Ask the player how they would have reacted to the situation. They are, of course, in charge of their own player character. That is one thing that they're in charge of. But they are not in charge of saying, no, well, actually, I didn't write that event in, so it didn't happen. How do you prep your players for this? Well, very simple. You literally say, listen, folks, once that story's in my hands, it's mine in as much as it's yours. This means that we're being reciprocal. Because when I create an adventure, you guys change it up all the time. So you know what? It's a two-way street. I can change, you can change, we can all change, everyone can change within the parameters and the rules within our game. So those are the common 7-player mistakes or misinterpretations when it comes to backstory. And at the same time, it's also 7 GM oversights that they seem to crop up from time to time. We forget that we're in charge, but we also forget that it's collaborative. And we also forget that it's contributive. The players are contributing to our world just as much as we're contributing to their player characters. So it's an interesting one. So your challenge, I'll say it 3 times. Hell, I'll say it 4 times. So your challenge this week is to look at your players' backstories for their characters and to decide if they're giving you enough information or not. You are then to take those backstories and work with the players to add in an extra incident or an event somewhere along the line into those backstories. You don't have to use it in your current campaign, but it will show the players that you are invested. You also talk to the players about their backstories and say to them, well, listen, we're going to be using backstories from now on, and if you're not, you should. We're going to use them from now on, so please make sure that you have one and that it's up to snuff. And if necessary, show them this video so they can see what they should and shouldn't be doing. You don't have to say anything in the comments because, well, that's a conversation between you and your characters, player characters anyway. I would like to hear from you, though, in terms of whether or not you feel that it's important to include backstories. Do you feel that your players want backstories included or not? Have you polled your players to see whether they want you to use their backstories or not? It's an interesting insight. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no, and sometimes it's I don't care. Either way, it's going to be giving you insight into how to run your game better, and that ultimately is what we're all after. People often don't believe me when I say that I use Dungeon Fog almost every single day. I really do. I absolutely adore Dungeon Fog. And as you can see, they keep bringing out new updates, new versions, new things. And if you look at these shared maps, some of them are absolutely spectacular. Now, Dungeon Fog, of course, if you use the code GREATGM, you will get a discount on a subscription to Dungeon Fog. Why do you want to subscribe? Well, quite frankly, if you're like me and you make maps, you make lots of maps, really lots and lots of maps, and that's the stuff not in the folders. You then go in and you make some more maps, and got nice little previews here of the maps that you have created. There are ways and means of using Dungeon Fog to do all kinds of phenomenal things, whether you're building ships or whether you're building dungeons, whether you are building hellscapes, whether you've got backups of backups, it really doesn't matter. Dungeon Fog is absolutely versatile. What I love about Dungeon Fog is not only do you make, let's say, for example, castles and things, but you can also make science fiction settings, you can make modern day settings. There is really absolutely no limit to what you can and can't do with Dungeon Fog. So if you're not a Dungeon Fog user, you should be if you use battle maps in your game. Dungeon Fog now exports all their battle maps to most decent VTT systems. So if you have a favorite VTT, you can import those maps in there, and they work well with Foundry VTT, and the lighting solutions import directly across. So really useful if you are making maps online, or maps to print out for that matter. We print them out in a book that is coming out fairly soon. So really first-rate piece of software. Thoroughly recommend you go and get it. Dungeon Fog sponsoring today's episode. Big thank you to my patrons who make the channel possible. Thank you. You are all heroes. And massive thank you to you for watching all the way through to the end. Until next time, I wish you and yours the very happiest of gaming.